Okay. So this week's Parsha is Parshas Vayakhel and only Vayakhel, not Pekude. But as we said, it's Parshas Shkolim, and tomorrow's Rosh Chodesh. But apparently, according to Mr. Ed, we read the Haftorah that we read this week is for Shkolim and not for Machar Chodesh, not for the day before Rosh Chodesh. Just to get everything clear. So we're on Parshas Vayakhel. That's page 517 in the Art Scroll Stone Chumash, and it's Shemos chapter 35. Begins, Moshe assembled the entire assembly of the children of Israel and said to them, "These are the things that Hashem has commanded to do them. On 6 days work may be done, but on the seventh day shall be holy for you, a day of complete rest for Hashem. Whoever does work on it shall be put to death. You shall not kindle fire in any of your dwellings on the Shabbos day." And then it continues to the topic of the rest of the Parsha, which is, Moshe said to the entire assembly of the children of Israel, saying, "This is the word that Hashem commanded, saying, take from yourself a portion for Hashem," the portion that they would donate to the Mishkan, to the tabernacle, and then continuing on to the construction of the tabernacle. So a number of things here. So first of all, the Kli Yakar comments on the first verse. Moshe assembled the entire assembly of the children of Israel and said to them, why is it the entire assembly of the children of Israel, not just Moshe assembled the assembly of Israel? So the Kli Yakar answers that here we're dealing with the building of the Mishkan, the building of the tabernacle, and it was important that it wasn't an individual effort, it wasn't the effort of the elites. It wasn't that the Mishkan, the tabernacle, was the place for the divine presence to rest amongst the elites, amongst the great Torah scholars. It was something that the entire Jewish people had a part in. That the entire assembly of Israel donated towards the building of the tabernacle, and every man had to give an equal portion, well, 1/2 shekel every year towards the communal offerings. It's something that the entire community had a part in, and in the offerings we even had an equal part in. So the entire assembly of the children of Israel were gathered for this mitzvah of building the Mishkan, the tabernacle, including the men, the women, the children. So because they all donated, they all gave towards it, and they all had a part in it. And specifically, it had to be built in a state of shalom, in a state of peace, because it's the place where the Shekhinah rests, and the Shekhinah doesn't feel comfortable resting amongst us. God's presence doesn't rest amongst us when there's a lacking of peace. The Medrash says that Hashem finds that the only vessel that can contain Hashem's bracha, Hashem's blessing, is peace. And when we don't have peace, so Hashem, the blessing that's sent to us, just runs right out of the container. The container can't contain it. And so it was important that when we're building the Mishkan, we're bringing Hashem's presence amongst us. There had to be peace reigning, and therefore the entire assembly were assembled. And he says it was specifically after Yom Kippur, that this took place right after Yom Kippur, right after Moshe came down with the luchos, with the tablets, the second tablets, which was Yom Kippur, when it was indicated we were forgiven. And Yom Kippur is a time that people ask each other for forgiveness and make peace with each other. So it's a time that peace reigned, everybody gathered together, so it's the appropriate time to bring the Shekhinah, bring the divine presence amongst us. And then it continues on to, on 6 days work may be done, and the commentaries comment that that's introduced with, these are the things that Hashem commanded to do them. What does that mean? These are the things that Hashem commanded to do them. Hashem commanded all the mitzvahs in the Torah. What are specifically these things Hashem commanded? So the Ramban explains that it's referring to the construction of the Mishkan, the construction of the tabernacle, and it's saying that Moshe, according to the Ramban, Moshe was originally commanded to construct the tabernacle before he came down with the first set of tablets. But once he broke those first set of tablets, so in his prayers and his conversations with Hashem, so Hashem said to him that I'm not going to rest my presence amongst you anymore. Instead, I'll send an angel who's going to escort you. And at that point, what Hashem was saying is that the divine presence would not rest amongst us. And there wouldn't be a Mishkan, there wouldn't be a tabernacle. And once Moshe pleaded for forgiveness, and he pleaded that Hashem should once again let his presence live amongst us. And Hashem agreed, and that was the big celebration. Hashem gave us the tablets and commanded us, and the Mishkan, the tabernacle, is back on, and that's what Moshe is saying, that these are the things that Hashem commanded to do them, meaning Hashem previously commanded about the Mishkan. These are the things Hashem commanded previously, that now we have an opportunity to fulfill them. Others say that this is going on the work of the Mishkan, the work of the tabernacle, which corresponds to the work that we cannot do on Shabbos. And I think the Rabbi Bachya speaks this out, that he says, these are the things that Hashem commanded to do them. On 6 days work may be done, but on the 7th day shall be holy for you. Meaning Hashem commanded to do the work of the tabernacle on 6 days, but not on the Shabbos, which tells us that the work that goes into building the tabernacle is the work that we cannot do on Shabbos. And that's where we derive what the categories of work that the Torah prohibits on Shabbos. But it concludes in verse 3, you shall not kindle a fire in any of your dwellings on the Shabbos day. So the commentaries ask, what's the significance of a fire more than any other category of work? There's plowing, there's planting, there's harvesting, there's sheep shearing, there's weaving cloth, there's building, there's all kinds of malachos, all kinds of prohibited activities. What is about fire? And the Rabbeinu Bachya says that in the construction of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle, we had all those things, all the prohibited categories of work. But in a person's house, the one that's most commonly used is fire. Because, I mean, what work is a person doing already in the home? Cooking, which involves lighting a fire. Cooking happens to also be one of the prohibited activities, but that begins with getting the fire going. Oh, good. Yeah. So that's the most common of the activities that one would do at home, and especially nowadays, for those who say that electricity is prohibited on Shabbos because it's similar to fire, so that's also the most common work, and especially something like a light bulb, which, I mean, you have to know nowadays with LEDs if they would actually consider that as a fire. But the old light bulbs that were filaments, that's a real fire that's going. It's just metal heated to the point that it's burning.
About hearing a battery operated chargeable.
Yes, so that's a shaila. That's a question that I don't know the halacha. I know that there are leniencies for people that need them. What they are, I don't know. That's something for the great halachic authorities, which I'm not one. But definitely something that someone should talk to someone should talk to a qualified halachic expert if it's an issue. Okay, so the Rabbeinu Bachya also comments on this fire on Shabbos, that he says that's the reason, because fire is the primary activity that someone would use in their house on Shabbos. So immediately after Shabbos, when we make a bracha, we make havdalah, and we make a bracha on a fire, on a flame. It's to show the difference, the separation between Shabbos and the weekday, is that in the weekday we didn't have a fire. We couldn't. On Shabbos we can't have a fire. That's prohibited. Now that the Shabbos is over, the malacha. What's the activity that we do to separate between Shabbos and the weekday? Is we light a fire. And he actually says that in the creation of the world itself, which is Hashem worked the 7 days Hashem created, and the 6 days Hashem created, 7th day rested. So the Rabbeinu Bachya says this gets a little Kabbalistic, but he mentions that right at the beginning of Bereshit, in the beginning of creation, the first day of creation, it says that what is it? That the land was tohu and vohu, and darkness was on the depths, and the ruach Hashem, the spirit of Hashem, hovered over the water. And Hashem said, "Let there be light," and there was light. I probably shouldn't be saying that by heart. Let me just look inside. Yeah. So when the earth was astonishingly empty with darkness upon the surface of the deep, and the divine presence hovered upon the surface of the waters, Hashem said, "Let there be light," and there was light. So and then in verse 4 it says that Hashem saw that light was good. I'm on page 3. That's following. Hashem saw that the light was good, and Hashem separated between the light and the darkness. So he says, in this you have all of these, all four of the blessings of Havdalah. And he says that the first, it says in beginning of verse 2, when the earth was astonishingly empty, the earth is the Aretz, and that's referring to the Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, which contained the grape, which contained a grapevine, and that's the bracha that we make, Borei Pri Agafen, that we make on the wine as part of Havdalah. And then it says that the divine presence hovered on the surface of the waters. The divine presence, the Hebrew is Ruach Elokim, and Ruach is the same root as Reach, as aroma, as smell. It's the Ruach means like the spirit, the breath. And it's the same root as the aroma. And that's a reference to the bracha of Havdalah, or maybe it's the opposite. That corresponds to the blessing that I'm sorry, the blessing of the besamim, of the incense, of the aromatics that we smell. And then there's the where am I? And then there's Hashem said, "Let there be light." That's the Borei Marei Eish, the bracha we make on the fire. And then Hashem separated between the light and the darkness. That corresponds to the separate Hashem Mavdal ben Kodesh L'Chol, the final bracha that Hashem separated between the holy and the profane. I thought that was a nice word. Okay, so now continuing on, verse 4 on page 517, Moshe said to the entire assembly of the children of Israel, saying everyone should give donations. Take for yourself a portion for Hashem. Everyone whose heart motivates him shall bring it as a gift for Hashem: gold, silver, copper, turquoise, purple, scarlet wool, linen, goat hair, etc. What's that? Etc. Right? And in verse 10, every wise-hearted person among you shall come and make everything that Hashem has commanded: the tabernacle, its tent, its cover, its hooks, its planks, its bars. Yeah, etc. Meaning the parts that takes craftsmanship instead of just raw material. So people who are wise-hearted, that means people who find themselves, and I'll get there actually. Skipping to page 519, it gives all the things that these people would bring, meaning they would craft it and make it. And then when they actually did it, in on page 519, verse 20, the entire assembly of the children of Israel left Moshe's presence, and every man whose heart inspired him came, and everyone whose spirit motivated him brought the portion of Hashem for the work of the tent of meeting, for all its labor, and for all the sacred vestments. So the Ramban points out that in verse 21, there's two groups of people. There's every man whose heart inspired him came, and everyone whose spirit motivated him brought the portions of Hashem. So there's the heart inspired and the spirit motivated him. So the Ramban explains that every man whose heart inspired him means that people who found that they had an inclination or a talent in the areas where the work would be needed for building the Mishkan, people who were handy in building or handy in crafting tapestries and weaving or artistic, and handy in any area that was going to be used in the building. So they came to donate not the material. I mean, they would have donated material also, but to give of their time and to give of their skills. And that this is a lesson for, this was part of building the Mishkan, the tabernacle, but this is true about any service of Hashem. That someone whose heart inspires him, meaning if we find that we have an inclination and we have gifts that could be used in the service of Hashem, and especially in a communal setting to further the holy work of the community. So that's part of building the Mishkan, building the tabernacle of Hashem, building the community, building Hashem, building really a place for Hashem's presence to rest in this world. Okay, that's what they did. In verse 22 on page 519, the men came with the women. Everyone whose heart motivated him brought bracelets, nose rings, body ornaments, all sorts of gold ornaments. Every man who was raised up an offering of gold to Hashem. And it said in all the different donations. So it says here that the men came with the women. Literally, it says the men came, or the men brought on the women. So the Ramban explains pretty much how it's translated here in the article in verse 22, meaning that who's the one who had most of the jewelry? Most of the jewelry was on the women. The women were the ones with the jewelry. Men have some jewelry too. It says by the golden calf, Aaron told the men to bring their jewelry. Men have jewelry too, but it seems that the primary wearers of the jewelry were the women. So it's the men came also, the women came with their jewelry, and the men came also, those who had jewelry. But Rav Moshe Feinstein explains this different. He says the men brought the jewelry on the women, and meaning that the women wore their jewelry to bringing it to where they were giving the donations, and they took it off there and handed it to the collectors. And the reason for that, Rav Moshe Feinstein says, is that people have all kinds of jewelry, and some of it sits in the jewelry box for months at a time, years at a time. Some of it, this is outdated and they don't wear it anymore. Some sits in a safety deposit box because it's valuable, but it's not something that anyone would ever wear because it's out of style. But the women were bringing it while wearing it to make a statement that I'm not giving away something that I don't use anymore. It's not like I'm clearing out, like with the school here every once in a while has a like, what's that? Or like a jewelry sale, but you're right, like a rummage sale where people donate their used jewelry and they sell it for like $1 or $2, and the kids, right? So you could buy someone else's old jewelry they're tired of it and they don't wear it, but you could wear it. But so they were making a statement. This isn't like we're clearing out our closets and getting rid of what we don't own. They wore it to the donation site to show this is what I wear, but I'm excited about the opportunity to use it and that it should be used in the building of the tabernacle. Okay, so they brought all these things. In verse 25, every wise woman-hearted woman spun with her hands, and they brought the spun yarn of turquoise, purple, and scarlet wool and linen. All the women whose heart inspired them with wisdom spun the goat hair, that they spun the threads that were used. And in verse 27, the leaders brought the shoham stones and the stones for the settings for the ephod and the breastplate, the spice and the oil for illumination, for the anointment oil, and for the incense spices. So someone asked me this a few weeks ago, that where did the oil come from? Like, they're in the desert, where did they get the oil for olives? And it answers that the leaders brought it. And there's a medrash that says that the leaders actually brought it up from Egypt, that they had a tradition that oil would be needed. But Rashi quotes, or is this Rashi? I know that a medrash is brought. I don't know if this is brought by Rashi. Rabbi Bachya definitely brings it, or the Orachaim brings it. That the medrash says that the word Nasim for leaders is missing a yud, and Rashi says that this is on verse 27. That's Pasuk of Zion. If you look the last word in the line in the article Stone Chumash, it's Nasim usually has a yud. It's missing that yud. Rashi says it's to indicate that the leaders are being criticized, so they're diminished because they didn't give immediately, and instead they said we'll wait and see what's missing and we'll give whatever's missing. But and that showed that thinking and showed a lack of excitement for, like, I want to give, let's give. So they're diminished because of that. But a medrash says that Nasim without the yud could also be read as clouds, and it's coming from a pasuk in Tehillim. And there's a medrash that says that these things that they didn't have with them, and they like rained from the clouds, and that's where they came from.
Yud.
What's that? In Nasim?
You look at on the right-hand side, 27, 28, where it says Rashi sides.
Yeah, let's see. Nasim, Amar and the Mara Nasim. Yeah, so there are 2 yuds there, right? But if you look in the Hebrew in the Torah, so it's missing. It has no yuds.
Okay.
Yeah, you see that? It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines up, the last word in the line in the Torah. So it has no yuds, and that's to show that they're diminished. Okay, so now the leaders of the craftsmen on page 521 were Bezalel, son of Uri, son of Flora from Yehuda, and Eliav, son of Achisamach of Dan. Okay, then it continues what they're commanded to do the work. And where are we? So in verse 4 on page 521, all the wise people came, those performing all the sacred work, each of them from his work that they were doing, and they said to Moshe as follows: the people are bringing more than enough for the labor of the work that Hashem has commanded to perform. And verse 6 on page 521, Moshe commanded that they proclaim throughout the camp, saying, men and women shall not do more work towards the good for the sanctuary. And the people were restrained from bringing, but the work had been enough for all the work to do, and there was extra. So the commentaries ask that it says the work was enough and there was extra. They ask that it seems to be contradictory, enough implies you have enough. Extra means you have more than enough. So what does it mean, enough and extra? If it was there's more than enough, it could have just said that there was extra for what they needed, not that there was enough and there was extra. So the I'll just one approach I saw from the Sforno says is that when a person crafts something, they never use all the material they have, because you have to cut things out into shape, and when you cut, you leave the clippings behind, and like let's say and if you're cutting, let's say in between like 2 points, so let's say you have this big roll of fabric. If you have exactly the amount that you need, exactly the amount of fabric you need, so if you make a tiny mistake in the measuring or the cutting, you're done for it. Because let's say even if you cut something too big, you can't cut off because now you don't have enough for the next thing. So what the Torah means is that there was enough in order to have extra, meaning there was enough that there was extra that they could make it in a normal way without being overly concerned about every single cut being perfect, because there was absolutely no room for error. There was basically that there was enough that you could make it where there was a margin for error. Okay, and then it continues through the work. So first in verse 8, the wise-hearted among them doing the work made the tabernacle. The tabernacle, I say is referring to, like Rashi says, is referring to the lower, the ceiling of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle, which was of the structure of the tabernacle, which was like a tapestry you'd see looking up from the inside. And then Rashi describes how they made it. And then in verse 14, he made curtains of goat hair for a tent over the tabernacle. That means like a cover for that to protect the roof, the ceiling. And that was more like a roof. And then on top of that, they had a decorative. In verse 19, he made a cover for the tent of red-dyed ram's hide and a cover of tachash hide. So on the top was like a decorative roof on top of the roof. Then they made the planks. He made the planks for the tabernacle of acacia with standing erect. That means that the planks were upright, like we tend to build with planks lying horizontal. These planks are set up vertical, one next to the next. And then in verse 35, they made the partitions. These were tapestries to partition between the Holy and the Holy of Holies. And then they made a screen for the entrance of the tent. And on page 525, verse, chapter 37, they made the ark, the cover for the ark, the table, the menorah, which we discussed all of this in Parshas Truma. And on page 527, verse 25, they made the incense altar, which was made out of gold and put in the Heichal, in the holies of the structure. Then on chapter 38, on page 537, they made the elevation offering altar, and they made the laver, how that's the, so that's on page 527, chapter 38, verse 8. He made the laver of copper and its base of copper from the mirrors of the legions who massed at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And our sages say that this was made out of copper, out of the mirrors, that the Moshe was disturbed originally when they gave mirrors, because he's saying mirrors are used, people use it for gaiva, for arrogance. They look at themselves, say how beautiful I am, and they use it to beautify themselves for acts of intimacy that might not be appropriate to be, sitting right in front of to be sitting in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle. But Hashem told him just the opposite, that these mirrors, the women in Egypt, the husbands, were completely beaten down. They were working in the field all day long and being beaten by the Egyptian taskmasters. And the women would beautify themselves with these mirrors, and they would use the mirrors to seduce their husbands in order to continue the next generation of the Jewish people. So he's saying just the opposite, that these were to build the Jewish people, and it's actually something that should be used in the divine service. Okay, then he made the courtyard. These are the pillars and the tapestries that was used as a screen around the courtyard. They were hung on these pillars. And then on page 529, verse 18, the screen of the gate of the courtyard was like almost a gate at the entrance, was embroiderer's work, also a screen made out of tapestries hung on or attached to pillars. And as we said, the maftir this week is from last week's parsha. It's actually the beginning of Kisisa, which is on page 485. It's Parsha Shkalim, and it's on page 485 with the census giving a half shekel. And this was done because, like we said, that every man in the Jewish community had to give a half a shekel every year to have a part in the communal offerings. And this was they started sending out announcements around Purim time, so people would bring it in time for Pesach, where they would be already starting the new dose of offering, or they would start using those shkalim, that money for the communal offerings. So we read this portion now because this is when they started announcing that it's time to send in your shkalim, send in your taxes, kind of, as your taxes is the wrong word, but send in your donation or it was a tax really, because it was required to have your part in the communal offerings. Yes, your dues, yes. And the Haftarah is also about the collection for the communal offerings in the Beis HaMikdash. Okay, shkoyach. Everybody have a great Shabbos. Yeah.